Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. How do small-town kids tell a story that everyone knows but no one talks about? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. The wife of the sheriff's deputy was cheating on him with a guy. The guy ends up dead from a shotgun shot to the head. The sheriff's deputy is somehow the first on the scene. The sheriff's department rules it a suicide. They never found the shotgun the guy allegedly used to shoot himself. The high school history teacher who had exposed himself in the park faced arrest. He spent 6 months on leave before returning to his teaching duties as if nothing had happened. For the senior slideshow, students put up a picture of him and played the Police song, "Don't Stand So Close to Me." A teacher grooms an R's teenager at a high school and gets caught by an off-duty cop who is suspicious that a young woman who is obviously not his wife or daughter is going into the teacher's house. The cop and the teacher were neighbors. Guy gets tried. He goes to jail. The girl receives a substantial settlement from the school district, estimated to be around $3.5 million. The teacher gets out of jail. The teacher now lives in a lovely lakeside house with the aforementioned student he groomed, courtesy of the payout of his former employer. What a fantastically happy ending. This is a series of incidents everyone knows about in my hometown, and everyone does talk about, but it's just too good not to share. Background first. This is a story about a small Australian coastal town called Wingham. It averages 1 or 2 pubs. That's another story. At the time of this story, it had 2. It also hosts an annual rodeo and a local football team. So, when the rodeo is in town, all the cowboys drink in the top pub. The top pub is a well-maintained, traditional wooden stone country pub and is quite popular with the, let's call them the town's relatively elegant drinkers. The bottom pub, on the other hand, is an older timber-only heritage-listed building. The building typically lacks proper maintenance. That's where the footballers drink. Cheap drinks. The crowd was much rougher than expected. And one year, a couple of the footballers decide to exit the bottom pub, saunter across the town park, enter the top pub, and loudly declare, "Anyone who wears a 10-gallon hat takes it up the arse." They promptly got their own arses handed to them. The following year, the entire football team strolls across the park and humiliates everyone in the top pub. The third year, all the rodeo people went to the bottom pub and beat up everyone in there. The fourth year, both groups unexpectedly encountered each other in the middle of the park halfway. In years 5 and 6, the pub park brawl began to take on the appearance of a tradition, and both groups brought extra people from out of town. Year 7, the local police called in extra officers from the nearby cities of Terry, Foster, and Port Macquarie, and they were waiting with paddy wagons, lockup vans for the two groups, who showed up and proceeded to fight with each other and the police. It took about 2 more years for the police to finally stamp it out, and the 9th and last year, they did it by preemptively arresting as many of the footballers as they could in a massive drink-driving sting a week before the rodeo, and threatening the rodeo people the instant they arrived in town with severe prison if they so much as blinked at the bottom pub. So yeah, my hometown. I'm not advocating for continued violence or mischievous behavior, but if there's a yearly brawl in the park in a small town, I mean, the cops really have to break that up? I don't know. I know it sounds bad, but actually sounds pretty cool. A guy killed his son for the insurance money, put a truck up on a jack and then dropped it on his kid and went to a party while he died. After that happened, it came out that he had killed his wife for insurance money out in California. He boarded up some windows to do work on the house locked her in the bathroom, and set fire to the house. There was a girl and her beau who went for a night on the town. They were seen arguing with a man at the end of the night. The next morning, the guy was found dead from gunshots in one location. The girl was found a couple of days later in another location. No one was ever arrested, and the main suspect was her married chief of police, ex. 40 years later, they dug the fella up to try and run some tests as part of a cold case investigation. When they opened his casket, his head had been removed and replaced with someone else's head. We in the town don't talk about it much, but that show, The Dead Files, did an episode about it. In an elderly couple's suicide pact, the husband drugs and asphyxiates his wife while they watch the sunset in a local state park, but loses his composure when it's his turn to die. I was pulled over by a park ranger for erratic driving. Going back home 5 miles away, my wife was still buckled in the front seat. My junior high school science teacher, from over 25 years ago, was involved with a student in my mother's class 20 years earlier while the girl was still very much underage, then married her before he came out as gay and split from her. I just remembered that he came out after getting caught with a guy on a back road. Not sure if his wife or someone else did this, but it came out that way. As I recall, the guy he was caught with would go on to be his partner from then on. He was still a teacher until he retired sometime in the mid-2000s. Everyone knew about it. My mother said the other girls were jealous because they all thought he was adorable and nice. If I remember correctly, he wasn't the only teacher of that era at my school who married a student either. And while I was still there, I found out this later. There was a young married teacher who was having sex with a student in the school. Despite this, he continues to work as a teacher. A respected military veteran and firefighter with his wife and 3 kids died of COVID-19. Anyone who knows he actually died overdosing on pain pills prescribed legitimately to his wife while drinking in full view of the kids. It wasn't a deliberate suicide attempt. It was a manipulative bid for pity after his wife caught him cheating with a teenager and told him that same night she'd be taking the kids and filing for divorce. Apparently, the manner in which she caught them cheating was also some of the highly irregular sex act on top of it all. There was a very brutal murder of a young special needs woman here. Her boyfriend's family took her in and held her captive for her social security checks. They forbade her from holding her daughter after she gave birth. They then tortured her for months in the worst ways possible, making her eat feces, making her eyes, tying her to the closet. They killed her by stabbing her and pushing her onto a railroad track. It barely got any news coverage. There was a fatal hunting accident involving a school child in a village with a population of approximately 5,000. A dad and his son took the boat out to hunt birds with a 2-round rifle. Dad is sitting in the back and the kid is in front. Dad fires the first shot, and just before firing the second round, the kid jumps up to see if the bird got hit right in the back of the head. It was instant. Couldn't stop thinking about what the father experienced while rowing back for a while. This was before cell phones as well. I was his classmate. Not close, but we hung out sometimes. A skater kid with punk hair. The school and community came together and held talks with us kids, which was a bright spot during that period. Now it's decades ago, so I don't think it counts as a common story, but I don't live there anymore, so I can't say. It didn't happen to me, but a buddy of mine grew up in a small farming community in rural Montana. This all happened about 15 years ago. There was a guy in his neighborhood who was known as a real friendly guy, who would wave to people while sitting on his porch. He would hand out the big-sized candy bars to trick-or-treaters on Halloween. Just a friendly old man. He had to have been in his late 80s or early 90s. Nothing seemed off about him. From the way my friend tells it, one day out of nowhere, a bunch of police cars, including an FBI van, pulled up to this old man's house. My friend told me they went inside, and a few minutes later, this harmless old man was being taken away in handcuffs. It drew a pretty big crowd, because remember, this is a small farming community in Montana. News travels fast. It turns out, this old man everyone loved had a really dark secret. In the 1960s, he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and not just any Klan group, but the infamous Mississippi White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, and he was connected to over a dozen unsolved murders of civil rights activists. It shocked everyone, and no one has really spoken of it since. Pleasant Grove, Utah, April 13, 2014. Darren West began cleaning out the garage at the home he once shared with his wife, Megan Huntsman. Nothing could have prepared him for what he would uncover. Inside a small white box wrapped in plastic was the tiny, decaying body of an infant. West immediately called the police. They searched the home and found 6 more dead infants, all in boxes, stashed away in the garage. After questioning, Huntsman admitted to killing the infants between 1996 and 2006. One was stillborn, as confirmed at autopsy. She was heavily addicted to meth and alcohol at the time, and said she killed them because she couldn't afford to raise them. Apparently, birthing, and killing multiple children was easier than using birth control. This shut our childhood town down. The trauma caused the cops to quit, and the extended family was left in a state of chaos. And the cherry on top was that she gave birth to 3 girls, whom she kept. The infant deaths were woven between the daughters she kept. So gnarly, but no one talks about it anymore. It became the town's shame. There was a huge mentally disabled man who would spend all day every day sitting on the steps in front of a store. When I inquired about him as a child, my father informed me that he was awaiting his mother's arrival. She ran the store. I was surprised because they looked very similar in age. It turns out that her father already impregnated the woman when she was 12 years old. We shouldn't have discussed it. Just pretend it's all normal. My town is 33,000, but this guy I went to school with died at the age of 18 from choking while high on opioids. A year later, his father committed suicide. Several years later, the older brother committed suicide. Many locals are aware of this extremely depressing story, yet they rarely discuss it openly. I asked my friends about it recently to see if they remembered. Following the closure of the restaurant, a former coworker of mine went into a downward spiral. He turned into a heroin manufacturer and found himself on the FBI's most wanted list. Anyway, so one day he and like 2 guys went around and broke into over 15 houses, stealing money and guns, until he broke into a house and there was a 16-year-old girl, and they kidnapped her and held her hostage. Police from all over the 3 surrounding towns, sheriffs, highway patrol, and SWAT engaged in a multi-hour standoff and a brief exchange of gunfire. I don't remember how they ended up getting him. It was a huge news story for months. Then it slowly got quiet. Nobody talks about it. Everyone remembers it. After so many years of trying, we finally got a brand new fire station. A few years later, they were preparing dinner when a call came in. They hustled out to the scene and took care of it. Once they completed their task, they received another call. They ran back to their station to extinguish the kitchen fire caused by a left-on stove while cooking dinner. I don't remember how long it took to repair the damage. No one really talks about that anymore. When I was a kid, there was a story about the girl who killed her parents with scissors. I didn't take much stock in it because kids tell scary stories. When we were in high school, our social studies teacher informed us about this issue. Her father was molesting her, and her mother knew it. She murdered them in their sleep with a pair of scissors. She then dragged their bodies into the garage and tried to burn them, but all she had was perfume. Then she went to the neighbors and made up a story that fell apart really quickly. The FBI agent showed up without a camera, and the only person in the county with a decent camera was my teacher. The extreme cold caused his camera to freeze, so the sheriff instructed him to feign taking pictures while the agents were present. Afterwards, they had to return to capture the actual evidence. One time, my mom pointed out the vacant lot where the house used to be. A few years ago, I asked her about it and put the story on Reddit. My research revealed that the state mental hospital had admitted her. Temporary insanity found her innocent. However, she experienced SA in the hospital and gave birth to a child. She lives a few miles away and has a Facebook account, but I've never tried to contact her. Her niece found the post on Reddit and contacted me a few years ago. Her mother was away in college. She denied the molestation story and said it was because of drugs. Drugs beyond ditchweed would have been nearly impossible to get in our tiny town back then. My middle school football coach, who hated me and me him, got charged with sodomy of 3 kids and other acts of molestation to a bunch of others. We held a team party at his house, where he had a room equipped with extra bunk beds and video game consoles, far beyond the age range of his 2 toddler sons. He told a group of the popular kids that they should come sleep over sometime. I saw the signs of that being creepy and weird. I even made jokes like, "What is this, an after-school special? Should we refer to McGruff as the crime dog when discussing the unusual party with our closest friends?" His assistant coach was also a police officer, whom I also held in high regard. After it all came out, no one talked about it, because the kids he was molesting were the popular bully kids with rich parents. I just looked him up. He spent 15 years in prison and is out now. He was a super groomer. It seems he volunteered to coach football and baseball to be close to kids. 10-year-old boy gets out of the house and runs to a neighbor for help. He and his siblings were being severely neglected and abused. 4 children were rescued. The house was in squalor. The house was littered with garbage and feces. The children showed signs of malnutrition. Police conducted a further investigation and discovered 3 dead infants in the house. They found 1 infant still attached to the placenta, stuffed in a backpack. The other 2 were skeletons and still had diapers and clothes on. They also found the family's pet dog dead, presumably from starvation. Blackstone House of Horrors, for anyone who wants to know more. It's a horrific case. Apparently the mother was trying to hide the children from her boyfriend, who did not want any more kids. They tore the house down, but I drive by the lot frequently and always feel sad for those babies. A kid in my grade was the son of a circuit court judge. Throughout the course of my high school years, there were several suicides in this small town among the students' population. There were enough suicides to truly stand out in such a small community. Then they mysteriously stopped, and in the last 30 years there haven't been any. The rumor is that the judge's kid was a murderer and knew he could get away with pretty much anything. Details were always sketchy. I'm glad I was on his good side. It's not exactly a small town, but rather a secluded area with a larger metropolis. At my high school, about 30 years before I attended, a married teacher moved in one of his students to be a live-in nanny at his house because she had a rough home life. There were rumors that the student and teacher were having an affair. Then one day the guy's wife goes missing. An initial investigation was conducted, but it was largely ignored due to the guy's close relationship with local law enforcement and his prominent status in the community. People pretty much stopped talking about it until a couple of years ago, when a podcast was released that really went into the case. The podcast kind of forced the police to reopen the case, and the guy was eventually arrested, charged, and sentenced for his wife's murder, even though her body had never been found. Went to that school for 4 years, and never heard about it until the podcast. The time and heir to a huge fortune from a now 150-year-old major brewery ran his sports car off a notorious curve in my hometown, killing his girlfriend and being arrested for DUI. He was never charged, as he and his insurance paid off the girl's family, and by threatening to sue the county for multi-million dollars for knowing that the curve called Dead Man's Curve was unsafe. He was never charged. He later took over his family's company and was even featured in some of the commercials before selling it to a multinational more than a decade ago. In the small town I grew up in, there was a story going around that a prominent local businessman had a rather unfortunate encounter with a carrot. The carrot became stuck in a specific part of his body, necessitating medical attention. What made it particularly amusing was that the guy had the brightest tuft of orange hair atop his head. We called him Carrot Ass. Whenever you'd see him around town, there'd almost always be some muffled chuckles happening in the background. The family vanished from Comerang House, a property in regional Australia. When the town learned that the family was suddenly missing, the pilfering began. The first local thieves noticed food on plates, unfinished. My family ended up with the giant mirror in the gold leaf frame. Then another family member took it, and I don't know where it is now. I think Mom does. No one talks about the mirror or the missing family. Creepy, huh? There were actually a few. One incident involved a man who explained a mental breakdown. No one knows why, but he was running barefoot through the streets with a kitchen knife and ended up taking his own life with it when confronted by police. This was only a year or two, I don't recall exactly, after his little brother died accidentally, too. Legit accident. He slipped and fell over the side of a canal after drinking in a bar that was right along it. Devastating. I know the older brother had a drug problem too, but I think everything just became too much. I knew the family well. They lived in my neighborhood. It was like the story vanished as soon as it happened. I worked at a well-known Canadian restaurant, better than fast food, not quite sit down, and the owner's husband was a justice of the peace. He got caught, arrested, and charged with crimes including smuggling drugs and laundering money a couple of years after I left for college. While grabbing a bite to eat, I became aware of the situation and later researched it online. Canada doesn't publish a whole lot on ongoing criminal cases like the US does. I never heard anything after that. It's 20 years later, and I run into my old boss on occasion. Also, he would bring booze to our Christmas parties at the restaurant and serve everyone. I was 15. The youngest employee was 14. He was the designated driver. The 14-year-old went home trashed, and her mom thought it was cute. I had my first beer at our Christmas decorating party. I was also on the clock. We were the only ones decorating. There were no customers present. They figured we were in a safe environment to drink. My parents would have been furious if they had known about this. I was too young to drive anyways. The fact wouldn't have worked in anyone's favor.